Hey, Glenn, how are you?
Hi, El. Thanks, I'm fine. And you?
I'm doing very well. Hey, thanks for being here. I understand you're doing some interesting work there at the Brussels Airport Company. So, if you would introduce yourself and maybe give a brief overview of what you're going to be discussing today.
So, I'm Glenn. I'm the HR Technology and Analytics Manager at Brussels Airport. So, that means that I'm responsible for all the HR related projects regarding technology and the analytics mission and vision. And I've also conducted a research a few months ago here in Belgium regarding the HR analytics maturity. And I've derived four concepts from that. And I would like to discuss, first of all, the research with you guys, and then also the four concepts.
All right. Well, I'll get out of your way, have at it, and then we'll talk about it. So, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. So, what I will be discussing today is the HR analytics maturity in Belgium. And the reason for my research was because I was looking in the literature, and very often I saw that um, using data in decision making is very good, not only for the quality of the decision making, but you can also start in predicting the outcomes of your decisions. But what I also found in all the literature was that HR departments overall, so not in a specific country, not in a specific sector, but in general, HR departments are really lagging behind on using data into decision making. We've all heard people say that HR is really opinion driven and decisions are taken by gut feeling. And I thought, okay, I understand that. And a few years ago, we've had some research here in Belgium, also more recently, and HR analytics was always on the strategic agenda of companies. But I had a question, why is the HR analytics maturity not following? Because I also had the impression that when comparing Belgium to our neighbor countries, that we were also lagging behind there. So not only the HR departments, but also Belgium. And that was the idea behind my research. And I did this research at Solvay Business School at the Free University of Brussels. And I've interviewed 41 Belgian companies who have participated. And the number 41, it was good to start deriving or it was good to start analyzing the results. But to really, for a better external validity, we should have more companies joining. So we've also decided to repeat this questionnaire in the following years, following months or following years, because we really want to follow up on the trends. But the results were in line with previous research and also in line with what we've expected. So that's why we've decided to go on with the analysis with the 41 Belgian companies. And in terms of characteristics, it was a very diverse group. It went from one to more than 2,500 employees, both nationally, internationally, and in different sectors. So it was really a diverse group. And the research question was, what is the current level of HR analytics maturity? And the analytics maturity model that was used in the research was that from Davenport and Harris, who are going from no analytics over predictive analytics. Oh, no, sorry, from descriptive analytics over predictive, prescriptive to autonomous analytics. And we've added no analytics for the purpose of this research because we were afraid that otherwise people would choose descriptive analytics where they didn't have any analytics at all. So that was the first research question, the current level. And then what we were certainly interested in was, are there any variables that correlate with a higher maturity? Because we know or we expect some companies in Belgium to already have a higher maturity, and we really wanted to know what they were doing. Were there any factors that were significantly positive correlated with that higher maturity? And when we're going to the results, we see really what we expected. So here we see the analytics scale going from no analytics to autonomous analytics, being from the left to the right. If you go more to the right, it is more difficult to implement those terms or those kind of analytics, but the value is also much higher. And what we see here, as I said, was also what we expected. The descriptive analytics, with 61% of the organization saying that they use descriptive analytics, is in line with previous results and is actually a great first step, because this means that organizations are starting to use data. And that is very important, I think, here in Belgium. A second A second thing that we've noticed, and that is very positive, is that the percentage of organizations using predictive analytics is higher than the percentage of organizations that are using no analytics. So this means that compared to 2 years ago, we've saw a shift from no analytics to descriptive analytics, but also more organizations are investing in the predictive analytics, so are really trying to step up their game. And then also, as expected, prescriptive and autonomous analytics is the least represented. But as I said, those are also the kinds of analytics that bring the most value, but are the most difficult to implement. So it was expected that they would have been lower. So now knowing that descriptive was well represented, but as well as predictive, we were really interested in seeing, okay, but those companies that had already implemented predictive analytics and were using it, and certainly prescriptive and autonomous, are there any variables that are common in those organizations and that could be used by the organizations now stuck in maybe not using analytics or the descriptive, just seeing what do we see in our organization, what can they do to improve their maturity. And there we found 3 variables that are positively correlated with high maturity, and those are the HR analytics is part of the HR strategy, the HR analytics employee is part of the company, not from the team. So that was also a question that we asked, because often we say we need an HR analytics person in the HR team, but our research showed that in the companies that participated, there was no significant correlation between having an HR analytics employee in the HR team. And I think that that is the reason behind is that to do or to have a good analytics practice, you need someone who has the knowledge of HR practices, but also has the knowledge of data science or can be the bridge between those 2 departments. And I think that is why only the analytics employee in the company was of significant importance. And then the last one is what we've discussed, that the data should be used in decision making, and also using HR analytics in decision making leads to a higher maturity. While we know this now, if we have a look at how those 3 variables or factors were, what the current state was, then we see immediately that there is a lot of work, because only 54% of the organizations already have an HR analytics person in the team. So this corresponds very well with the fact or the reason maybe why the maturity is still on the left side of the analytics scale. If we have a look at is HR analytics part of the HR strategy, it is good to see that most of the companies, or over half of the companies, so almost 60%, agree or strongly agree with this statement. But in the near future, we hope to see that this number increases to about 85 or 90%, because it does not mean that it is part of a strategy, that you're also actually really doing something with it. So we really hope to see those numbers going up to about 90%. And then we hope that 75, 80% of those organizations are really doing something with HR analytics and use HR analytics in their day-to-day practice. And then ideally, as we said, use HR analytics in decision making. It's also very important to combine HR and financial data. And here we see that there is work to do, with only 46% of the companies combining these days HR and financial data. And for me, it struck me because financial data is very important to lead and to guide your organization, but HR, the people, those are the assets that you need to make money, as they say. So for me, it is also a big point or a big factor that they need to work on, is combining those 2 data. And then if we ask them what could help develop the HR analytics practice, our first idea was that they would go for money and data. We need more money and more data, because that is often an excuse that I've heard when I was talking with peers. But our research showed that money and data were least needed to help develop the practice, but it were tools, time, knowledge, and resources. And there again, it struck me, because if we only have a look in the Benelux, so that's Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, in our neighbor countries, we see that we have a lot of potential when it comes to HR tech startups. We have a company here, HR Tech Valley. It's a community that brings HR tech startups or HR tech providers together. And what we see here is that this is only part one of the 550 HR tools that are available or that have a headquarter in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So the second slide is just part two. So what I think that we see here is that there is a lot of potential. I had some scenarios in my head. One of them was going to be, what if the respondents said that they needed tools to go to a higher maturity, but the two previous slides would only show 20 or 30 providers? Then we really would have a problem between what is needed, the demand, and the supply, because there are not enough providers or they are not providing the tools that are needed. But that is not the case. Or imagine another scenario where research showed that tools were needed, but tools were already implemented. They were already adopted by the companies, but the maturity wasn't following. Then we would have more of a structural problem. The tools are implemented, but why are they not working? Is the adoption rate too low? Are the tools not doing what they are thought to be do? So those are two scenarios where, in my opinion, we have had a lot more work. But what the research showed right now is that there is just a lot of potential, because organizations are willing to improve their maturity. It is high on the strategic agenda. They think that implementing tools would immediately increase their maturity. And as the two previous slides have shown, there are a lot of tools available only here in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So we're not even talking about worldwide tools or worldwide providers. So that is why I've also discussed these kinds of insights and these kinds of results with colleagues. And then from those discussions, I've derived four concepts that I would like to discuss now with you guys. And those four concepts are present in every organization. Those are people, business, data, and strategy. But what I've noticed is that organizations with a higher maturity are organizations that approach those four concepts together. And those organizations really align the concepts. Where organizations with a lower analytics maturity are organizations who work more in silos. For example, people is the responsibility of the HR department. Business is the responsibility of the operations department. Data, if it is existent in the company, is part of a digital or a data and analytics team. And then we have the strategy that is completely managed by senior managers. That worked maybe before, but what I've learned from my interviews with people is that if you align them and if you start with a business case, then there is a higher chance of succeeding. We're in human resources or human capital. You can name it however you want. We are working with humans, with people. So people should be the primary focus of everything we are doing or everything where we want to bring value. We need to really understand who are our people that are working in our organization. What are their needs? What are they expecting? What do they want? And where can HR analytics bring value for them? And if you're going to ask yourself those questions first, then you have a higher chance to have a higher adoption rate. And with the adoption rate, the maturity will follow. It's the same with business. Some people just want to implement HR analytics because it sounds cool or because it's a trend. That's okay. But if you're just going to implement it or to use it just for the sake of HR analytics, then you won't really derive any value from that. You need to look where the business or where your business questions arise and where HR analytics can bring value. And also don't forget to align your people and your business. People are working for the business. They have often a common goal. There is a cultural fit. So looking for the business questions and the people questions can then lead for me to data strategy, to data, because data, here in Europe, we have the GDPR, who is protecting the privacy of employees. And it's really necessary that you have a good governance model when it comes to data. Which data are you going to gather? For how long? When will you delete it? Who will have direct access to it? Who will see the data? So data is needed, a data strategy is needed. But to answer the question, you also need the right data. And the data has to be of good quality. Because very often I've heard people say, and that was why I was expecting that the results would show that people needed better data. Because I very often hear people say, okay, we need to improve our data quality, or we don't have a system where our data is centralized. So make sure that you have a centralized and structured system where data is gathered that can answer the questions or that can bring value to the people and the business. And then the last concept, very important, is a strategy. We need to break out of just our HR department, just our HR silo. At Brussels Airport, we are really trying to break through those silos. And I'm, for example, in a position between HR, finance, and the data and analytics team. And in that way, we can also align the analytics strategy, not only to the HR strategy, but also to the strategy of other departments. And most importantly, to the organization strategy. And also here, by doing that, you improve not only the adoption rate of the analytics, but you can also improve the quality or the perceived quality of your analytics, because you're really bringing value to the organization where the organization needs or wants it, instead of just doing analytics for the sake of analytics. So those were the 4 concepts and was my research that I wanted to discuss with you, Al. I hope that it was interesting for the attendees and that it can maybe inspire them to do a research as well to get to know better the analytics maturity state in their country, or to just get a better insight in what can drive analytics maturity there. And I just hope to that it inspired and gave some good insights.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for doing that research. It's really valuable, and it's really, frankly, cool. And there's a host of questions that popped to mind. And let me just jump to one that you just shared there at the end. I have long been an advocate of formulating a data strategy, and in fact have that work in conjunction with an analytics strategy, because in our discipline historically we've just been content with being customers of the data that we have access to. And in your language, and I just want to pull this out if this is any insight that you have, is a lot of the data that's appropriate to answer the questions, the business questions leaders want or need to know, might not be within our organization right now. It might not exist. So it might have to be either created through a survey, for example, or a new process, or potentially acquired from labor market data. Are you seeing that? Is that something that you touched on? And if not, what are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question or a very good remark. And that is indeed, Al, what we are seeing very often, that there are 2 kinds of organizations, in my opinion, or maybe 3. There are the kinds of organizations that don't gather any data and don't see any value in that, or that just gather data to perform their operational tasks. Then we have organizations that are really gathering all kinds of data, often scattered around different systems where the data quality is low. And because they gather different or all kinds of data, they are subsequently looking for what data can we now use. And then we have the kind of organizations that start with a business question and that start with, okay, which insights, which business questions do we have, or what kind of observations are there in my organization, observations by line managers or by senior managers or by employees, and which data do we need to reply to these questions. And that is where indeed you have to be prepared as an HR department as well, to not only rely on the hard data that you can find very often in your HR information system or human capital management system, but also rely on qualitative data and start gathering more data once you really know the business question.
That's great to hear. And so once you have those data in place, I was taken by the fact that, and I forget the exact wording, but I know tools and time were the top 2 needs, correct me if I'm wrong, to create analytics capability. And so both are scarce. The first one is tied to budget, and sometimes they're, have to develop a business case. And obviously time, we're all constrained, by time. And it's my experience that both the tools and the associated budget and the time it takes to do this work has been underappreciated by leaders. And so, in other words, we have to do a better job selling what it's going to take in terms of budget and time and resources. Is that what you're seeing as well? And then that invites a question: how do we sell this better?
Yeah, I think that what I see is that people, when we're talking about HR analytics, is also a very new discipline, certainly here in Belgium. With only the last few years, we see a lot of HR startups and HR providers emerge. But what I see is when I was in the beginning talking about HR analytics, like you said, senior management said, but what is it going to cost? There is always a cost, it's always an investment. But what a lot of HR people are forgetting, and that's probably because they are not like the number guys or girls, but is that you also have to look at the return on investment that you will get. If you can use analytics, for example, to predict recruitment, like Thomas said before, if you can try to predict which people will be recruited or which people will leave your company, you also have to take into account that you will get a return on that investment. But there, I think it is also up to the HR tech providers to come up with the sales story and not only saying we're going to implement a service, a platform here, a tool, but we can also give you a service to make you acquainted to the system and to get you up and running in a very short time period so that as of month 2 or 3, you will see a return on investment. And I think that that is really needed to also convince business leaders and senior management of the value of HR analytics. Because the feedback that I get now is when I talk about numbers is the numbers are coming from HR. Are you sure they are correct? We also need to gain credibility when it comes to numbers. And I think that there HR analytics can bring a lot of value, but we will first have to prove which value can be brought by HR analytics to the business.
Yeah, and the two things come to mind with that because one is the, and I'll own this. So in the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to participate in John Boudreau's group at the Center for Effective Organizations at USC. And at the time, there was a gentleman who brought an analogy to HR analytics, or what was then the common term was human capital analytics, to marketing analytics. And again, this is almost 20 years ago. And the idea was, who built a business case for marketing analytics, market research? It was just deemed a priority that they need to better understand the customer. And so for us to be kind of on our heels, on the back foot, to say, oh, we got to prove that HR analytics is a priority is kind of, it doesn't make sense, at least in my view, of course, but you and me are both drinking the Kool-Aid. We're making the Kool-Aid, not only drinking it. So I'm just going to put that out there for a second, and I'm going to ask this question. I had the great pleasure of speaking with a leader at Netflix yesterday. She's fantastic, and I'm going to keep that conversation confidential. However, I did get to, and we agreed that the role of a people analytics leader now, HR analytics leader, or even practitioner, is not only to be a good analyst, but to be an educated shopper. It's not that you're just doing research and you're doing everything in Excel or SPSS or SAS. You actually need to understand what these tools, these 550 tools within the Benelux region can do, and how it can actually help you deliver value to the business. So what are your comments there? Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah. So when I was talking to business leaders a few days ago, it were business leaders from small and medium enterprises. So the SMEs, they are not very fond of, okay, we're going to invest in a tool unless we see an immediate return on investment. For multinationals, it's different. They have budgets for that. And the remarks that I got, or the feedback that I got, was indeed that people literally said, but we agree with your research, Glenn, because we also need the tools, but where are the tools? So they cannot find those tools. And that is, I don't understand it, because I've shown them all the 2 slides as well of the 550 companies. So then I said, okay, what you guys need is also, and it was tools, time, knowledge, and resources. You also need the knowledge. And then I immediately got the feedback, yeah, but we are not going to pay for a consultant to give us feedback, or we are not going to outsource that. And there I did not make the analogy to marketing, but I made the analogy to recruitment outsourcing. A few years ago, someone had the idea to start outsourcing the recruitment activities. And I'm pretty sure that in the beginning, the business and the business leader said, why are we going to outsource this? We need to keep this in-house. But nowadays, a lot of companies are outsourcing. And I think that we need to make the same reflection when we think about HR analytics. HR analytics is an expertise. And if we are talking about implementing tools or creating an HR tech roadmap, then we need to dare to also say, okay, we are going to outsource this project. It's not a full-time project for 1 year, but we're going to look for an organization, a person, a tool that is interested or that is capable of not only providing the tool, but can also provide a service. And that is what I've said before. I think, Al, that it is important for the HR tech providers to not only provide us with tools, but also with the expertise and the service to implement them. Because we may not forget that in HR, the typical HR profile that we see in 95% of the organizations are not familiar with HR analytics tools. So we also need the service and the knowledge that has to be provided, and ideally that is provided by a HR tech provider, or maybe more ideal by an independent consultant who can really look at the company, the culture, the problems, and then with his knowledge of, for example, the 550 providers, select the right tools for the roadmap, the tech roadmap.
Yeah, Glenn, I want to celebrate that narrative so much. Yeah, I appreciate there are those who regard this discipline as new, but speaking personally and on behalf of those who have been chopping wood in this discipline for a long time, what you just shared is something that I think is an absolute essential. The idea that there's going to be a tool that you adopt, you plug it in, and all of a sudden it does magic, or that there's enough expertise and capacity to that notion of time that you highlighted earlier, because everyone has their day job. So there's been so many technologies that have been brought in, well-intentioned, that have sit on the shelf, that have under-delivered, and it's no fault of the technology. It's no fault even of the organization. There's just been this scoping gap around the capacity to actually do the work, the data wrangling, doing the initial analysis, the dashboard builds, whatever the case is, even checking the algorithms and having the governance around both data and the appropriateness of the math. So I really celebrate what you're sharing, because I think as we come in I don't know if we can talk about the wake of COVID, because we're still in the midst of it. But I do believe there has been this reinvention of talent strategy, workforce strategy, workplace strategy. Is it the home? Is the office? And the more data that we can bring to that discussion, the better. It's obviously like no duh, but where does that data reside? What technologies does it get analyzed in? How does it get published? To who? That's all going to be enabled by technology, and that's more often than not the core HR technology. There's these specialized technologies of that 550 that you mentioned. So I certainly celebrate your work. So as we start to wrap up now, any closing comments, or how can they learn more about you and the study?
Okay, so if anyone wants to learn more about myself or the study, you can always send me a message through LinkedIn. And I think any closing thoughts, I always repeat myself, and that is, get the basics right. Don't start just implementing a tool for the sake of implementing it, or start with analytics because it sounds cool, because then, as you said, El, you will implement the tool with the best interest, but because there is a gap between what the tool will actually bring to a company and what you need in the company, there is a gap, a discrepancy, and that will lead to a failure of adoption, and that will again decrease the credibility of human resource departments when it comes to use of data and analytics. So get the basics right, get to know your people and your business and which questions they have, derive from these questions, do look for, okay, how can we solve them with analytics or with another tool, and then only then start with shopping, as we said, shopping for the right tool.
Well, Glenn, thank you for sharing. Thanks for the work that you've done. I look forward to amplifying your work next week at our conference. And yeah, keep it up and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you for having me, El. Bye.
All right, pleasure. Bye-bye.